When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg. But something inside me stayed calm. I couldn't believe the words I was hearing. All the years I had loved her, treated her like my own daughter. And this was what it came to. It wasn't just a passing disagreement. It felt like a storm had entered our home and was tearing everything I had built with love apart. I could see the surprise in her eyes, almost like she expected me to fight back or to break down. But I didn't. I remember standing there in the quiet kitchen. The sun was just setting, spilling a soft light across the counter where we used to laugh together over tea. My heart ached, yes, but I also felt a strange calm. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the years of being a mother, learning to hold my emotions quietly. I didn't know how to respond. I only whispered, I understand. She didn't say anything else. She just turned, walked past me, and left the house. The sound of the door closing behind her echoed in the empty hall. That click, it's a sound I will never forget. It was the first time I realized that the family I had known had changed, maybe forever. And in that moment, I had no idea that this was only the beginning. My son, Arman, had always been my pride. From the day he was born, I watched him grow with wonder in my heart. I would sit by his crib for hours, just watching him sleep, marveling at the tiny hands and feet, the soft rise and fall of his chest. He was curious, gentle, a little stubborn at times, but always kind. He had a way of noticing small things that most people would overlook. If a neighbor dropped a bag of groceries, he would run to help. If a stray cat appeared near our gate, he would leave his toys to feed it. I loved seeing his heart open to the world, and I hoped he would carry that same kindness into every part of his life as he grew. I often wondered what his future would hold. Who would he love? Who would stand by him when life got hard? I hoped for someone who would cherish him as deeply as I did. I knew I could never replace his father, who had passed when Arman was very young, but I promised myself I would do everything I could to help him grow into a happy, confident man, and I prayed that the person he chose to love would be gentle, understanding, and caring. When Aisha came into our lives, I welcomed her with open arms. I remember the first time I met her was at a small cafe, Arman nervously introducing her as his friend. She had a bright smile, the kind that could light up a room, and when she looked at me, there was a warmth in her eyes that made me think, perhaps this is the one. She laughed easily, spoke politely, and when she held my hand, she called me Mom. For a moment, it felt like a miracle, like the family I had always dreamed of was finally coming together. Those early days with her were filled with small joys. We shared festivals together, decorating the house with garlands and lights. We baked sweets for Eid, laughed over spilled flour and sticky fingers, and I felt a closeness I hadn't known in years. Birthdays became celebrations of love, not just for Arman, but for our whole little circle. Even the ordinary days felt special. Sitting in the kitchen, sipping tea while she recounted her day at work, I would feel a quiet satisfaction that our home was full of life, warmth, and laughter. I thought she was the daughter I never had, and I treated her like one, offering advice gently, listening without judgment, and sharing stories from my own youth. I remember the first time she cooked for me at home. Arman had insisted, saying, "Mom, she wants to do something special for you." I sat at the dining table, my hands folded in my lap, watching her move nervously in the kitchen. She was careful with each step, tasting as she went, adjusting the spices, and checking the recipe on her phone. When she brought the food to me, she smiled shyly. "I hope you like it," she said softly. "It's perfect, my dear." "Truly," I said, and I meant it. I could see the relief in her eyes, the tiny spark of pride that made her shoulders relax. That meal was more than just food. It was the beginning of a bond, a string of moments that made me feel she truly belonged in our lives. Over time, these moments multiplied: cups of tea, quiet talks in the living room, late-night laughter over silly mistakes in cooking. It was the kind of closeness that makes a house feel like a home. Arman and Aisha's engagement came naturally, like the turning of a gentle tide. I helped with every detail of the ceremony, from choosing the flowers to preparing small gifts for relatives. I was involved in every step. I remember the day of the wedding vividly. I held Arman's hand tightly, feeling the warmth of his fingers, and whispered that I loved him. I cried not out of sadness, but because of the overwhelming love and pride I felt. Everything seemed perfect. Our family was complete, or so I thought. The first few years of their marriage were filled with laughter, shared stories, and quiet companionship. Aisha and I would sit together, sharing recipes, swapping advice, and sometimes just sitting in silence, sipping tea, while Armin played with the children of our neighbors. Those days felt like the life I had always hoped for. Peaceful, ordinary, and full of love. I cherished the little rituals we had built, morning greetings with warm smiles, weekly walks in the garden, and the shared excitement of family meals where everyone laughed together. But change is often subtle at first, almost imperceptible. I noticed small shifts in Isha's behavior. She became quieter around me, less open. She spent more time in her room, whispering on the phone, or typing messages that she quickly hid when I walked by. I told myself I might be imagining things. Maybe she is just stressed, I thought. Maybe she's adjusting to married life. I tried not to worry, clinging to the memories of warmth and laughter that had made our early days so bright. Yet over time, the small changes began to add up. Minor disagreements became sharper than they used to be. I would suggest a way to arrange the kitchen, or offer a simple idea for a meal, and her smile would vanish. I could feel the distance growing between us, like a wall being built brick by brick. She started avoiding me in the kitchen, the living room, and even during family meals. The laughter we once shared became rare, replaced by quiet glances and tense silences. I tried to reach out, to bridge the gap. I brought her tea in the afternoon, asking softly, "How was your day?" I left little notes for her on the kitchen counter, reminders that she was loved and welcomed. I reminded myself to be patient. Maybe she is going through something, I would say to myself, but deep down, I couldn't shake the small knot of worry that grew heavier in my chest each day. Sometimes, I caught myself replaying moments in my mind, wondering if I had said something wrong, if I had overstepped, if I had failed as a mother. Every fleeting interaction seemed significant: the way she avoided eye contact, the tone of her voice, the sighs that seemed directed at me. It was exhausting to hold back my concern, to smile and nod when my heart ached inside. Even Armin, busy with work and his own life, seemed unaware of the growing tension. He would brush off my worries, saying, "Mom, don't she's just tired." And I wanted to believe him. I really did. I wanted to trust that this was only a phase, a temporary shadow over our happy home. But I could feel the distance widening, stretching the fabric of our family in ways I could not mend. Some nights, I would sit by the window, the cool breeze brushing my face, staring out at the quiet street, and whisper, "What am I missing? What did I do wrong?" The uncertainty gnawed at me. The daughter I had welcomed, the person I had loved as my own, seemed to be slipping away, and there was nothing I could do, nothing I could say, to stop it. Even as I tried to focus on the small joys, the smell of fresh bread, the morning sunlight spilling across the kitchen, Armin's smile could not shake the quiet unease. The warmth of our early days felt distant now, like a memory fading in the light. I held on to hope, fragile as it was, that the closeness we once shared could return. But deep down, I knew that things were changing, and I felt the first twinge of a fear I would not be able to shake, that the family I had known, the life I had cherished, might never be the same again. The first real sign came one rainy evening. Armand was out with work, and I was in the living room, folding laundry that had been piling up all week. The sound of the rain tapping against the windows was soothing, or at least it should have been. But that evening, the patter felt louder, almost like it was echoing the unease in my heart. I was carrying a small pile of freshly folded clothes when I heard Aisha speaking on the phone. Her voice was low, tense, and distant, like a shadow over the room. I couldn't make out all the words, but one phrase cut through clearly: "I don't need her here anymore." My hands froze, and the clothes slipped from my fingers, tumbling onto the couch. I could hardly breathe. Could she really mean me? Was it a passing remark, or a joke I wasn't supposed to understand? My heart started to pound so hard I thought it might burst. I debated whether I should confront her immediately, ask her to explain what she meant. But something inside me hesitated: fear, disbelief, perhaps hope that I had misunderstood. So, I stayed silent, just sitting on the edge of the couch, listening to the rain as it traced patterns down the glass. The next day, I tried to approach her gently. "Aisha, can we sit and talk?" I asked softly, my voice careful, calm. She looked up from her phone, her eyes cold, and said, "I'm busy, Mom. Later." The word later hung in the air, a wall between us. I nodded quietly, my throat tight, and walked away. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that she just needed space. But deep down, a small seed of worry had begun to grow, twisting in my chest. Days turned into weeks, and the distance grew heavier. I noticed her sighs whenever I entered a room, the sharpness in her jaw whenever I suggested something, even something as ordinary as adjusting the curtains or adding salt to a recipe. Every little gesture of mine seemed to irritate her, and every small smile between us became rare. Even Armand, busy with work and meetings, seemed oblivious to the quiet tension building in our home. I wanted to tell him, but I feared I would sound paranoid. One afternoon, I was baking bread in the kitchen, kneading the dough slowly, letting the warmth of the oven fill the room. Aisha came in, glancing at me briefly before saying, "Mom, you should stay out of things that aren't your business." I froze, the dough slipping slightly from my hands. My mouth went dry. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. "I'll be careful," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. But inside, a stab of hurt tore through me. It was the first time I felt truly unwelcome in my own home, in the life I had built with love. Later, I tried to speak to Armand. "Armand, is everything okay between you and Aish?" I asked quietly, sitting beside him on the couch. He waved a hand, smiling but distracted. "Mom, stop worrying. She's just stressed with work." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But a knot of unease had taken root in my chest, growing heavier each day. The laughter that once filled the house felt like it belonged to a memory now, distant and fading. Then came the whispers. One afternoon, a neighbor casually mentioned she had seen Aisha meeting someone in the park late at night. Another time, a friend who came over for tea commented, "She seems distant. Is everything all right at home?" Each remark felt like salt on an open wound. I wanted to confront her, to ask her directly what was happening, but I was scared. I feared it would lead to arguments, to anger, to more distance, so I remained quiet, internalizing my worry, letting it gnaw at me in silence. I remember sitting by the window one night, holding a warm cup of tea, the steam curling up into the dim light of the kitchen. My hands shook slightly, not from cold, but from a heaviness in my chest. I whispered to myself, "What did I do wrong?" Over and over, the thought replayed in my mind, a quiet refrain that refused to leave me. I replayed every moment I had shared with her, the smiles, the conversations, the small gestures of care, searching for some clue I had missed, but nothing explained the distance, the coldness, the subtle but growing hostility. Arguments began quietly, almost imperceptibly. Aisha would respond with clipped answers, her tone sharp but controlled. She would avoid meals at the table, sometimes leaving the house without explanation, leaving Armand and me with a strange, heavy silence. Even the walls of the home seemed to echo with the tension, absorbing the small words, the brief glances, the unspoken frustrations. I tried to remind myself to be patient. I told myself she was adjusting, that stress could make people act strangely. But deep down, a small truth was undeniable. The heart of our home, the shared laughter, the little moments of comfort and connection was slowly disappearing. It wasn't just tension, it was betrayal creeping in, almost imperceptibly, like a shadow spreading across a sunlit room. And I felt powerless. My attempts to reach her, to offer kindness or understanding, were met with silence or, worse, sharp words that made me doubt myself. Was I overreacting? Was I imagining the hostility? My mind circled endlessly, searching for answers that never came. I began noticing more small signs, the way she rolled her eyes when I spoke, the way she avoided sitting next to me on the couch, the way her laughter no longer included me. Even the children of our neighbors, who used to adore her company, now seemed awkward around her. Every ordinary moment became a reminder of the widening gap between us. Some nights, I would sit alone by the window, wrapped in a shawl, staring at the street lights flicker in the quiet neighborhood. My hands would cradle a cup of warm tea, but my chest felt heavy, as if it carried a weight too large for me to bear alone. I whispered to myself, "I've loved her. I've welcomed her. What went wrong?" The question had no answer, and the silence of the house seemed to mock me. I realized slowly that I was witnessing a transformation. I could neither stop nor explain. The daughter I had welcomed into my home, whom I had trusted and loved as my own, was slowly withdrawing. Her presence became scarce, her words sharp, her actions distant, and with each passing day, I felt the helplessness deepen, a quiet ache that settled into the corners of my heart and refused to leave. It was a late afternoon when everything finally came to a head. The house felt unusually quiet, the kind of silence that makes you notice every creak in the floorboards, every sigh of the old furniture, even the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I was in the living room, folding clothes that had been sitting untouched for days. I tried to focus on the simple task, the familiar rhythm of folding and stacking, but my mind kept wandering to the subtle tensions that had been building for weeks. Armand was at work, busy as usual, and Aisha had locked herself in her room for most of the afternoon. I could hear the faint click of her computer keys, the occasional rustle of paper, and the quiet murmur of her voice, probably on the phone again. The air felt heavy, almost charged, like the calm before a storm. Then, there was a soft knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat. "Mom, can we talk?" It was I. My hands froze in mid. I set the clothes down, my fingers trembling slightly, and nodded. She opened the door fully and stepped inside, closing it gently behind her. The movement was careful, deliberate. Her eyes were wet, not with tears, but with an emotion I couldn't immediately name. There was tension in her posture, a stiffness I had never seen before. "I don't think you should be here anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I blinked, disoriented. My heart froze, thudding painfully against my chest. I wanted to shout, to cry, to beg her to explain, to stay, but instead, an odd, quiet calmness settled over me. Perhaps it was a defense mechanism, or perhaps the years of patience had taught me that shouting would change nothing. I nodded slowly, my voice barely audible. "I understand." Her eyes widened, surprise flickering across her face. It was almost as if she had expected me to argue, to cry, to plead, to fight for my place, but I didn't. I had learned over the past weeks that no amount of argument could change what was happening. "Why?" I asked quietly. "Why now, after all these years?" She looked away, biting her lip. "Complicated. I can't have you in my life the way you used to be." Her words were soft but carried a weight that pressed down on me. I wanted to ask more, to demand explanations, but the words caught in my throat. I simply nodded again, the knot in my chest tightening. A tear slipped down my cheek, but I let it fall. I didn't wipe it away. It felt like a quiet acknowledgement of the hurt, a small, silent recognition of the betrayal I had suspected but never fully faced. The next few days were unbearable. Aisha avoided the house entirely, the shared meals, the small conversations that once filled our lives with warmth. I tried to maintain my routine, folding laundry, cooking meals, keeping the house in order, but every action felt hollow without her presence. Even Armand seemed unaware of how deeply the relationship had fractured. When I tried to speak to him about it, he would brush me off gently, saying, "Mom, she's just going through a phase. Give her space." But I knew it wasn't a phase. One evening, seeking some comfort, I decided to clean out the old family photo albums. Perhaps the memories captured in those pages could remind me of the love and laughter we once shared. I opened the albums carefully, flipping through the pages filled with smiling faces, shared celebrations, and quiet afternoons at home. For a brief moment, I felt warmth flood through me, a nostalgic reminder of simpler times. But then I noticed a series of photographs I hadn't seen before, pictures of Aisha and Armand, smiling at each other in ways that seemed secretive, almost hidden. There were small notes tucked between the pages, words she had written but never shared with me, describing plans, thoughts, and feelings I had no part in. I felt a pang of fear and doubt, a creeping realization that something I had trusted completely was slipping from my grasp. It was then I understood the truth I had been dreading. This was not a small betrayal, nor was it accidental. It was deliberate. The careful smiles, the secret notes, the distance, it all pointed to something I could no longer ignore. I didn't confront her immediately. I needed to process the emotions swelling inside me, to give myself time to breathe, to understand the storm that had arrived at my doorstep. I spent long nights sitting by the window, staring at the quiet, dark streets, whispering to myself, why would she do this? How could someone I trusted turn away from me so completely? I replayed memories in my mind, searching for signs I had missed. I remembered the first meal she cooked for me, the way she had called me Mom in those early days, the laughter we had shared over cups of tea and quiet afternoons. Had I misread it all? Was that warmth genuine, or was it something she had always meant to hide? The questions spun endlessly in my mind, each one heavier than the last. The breaking point came one Sunday morning. I had prepared breakfast for everyone, hoping for a peaceful, ordinary meal to restore a sense of normalcy. I set the table carefully, arranging fresh flowers in the center, placing plates and cutlery with a kind of precision that had once brought me joy. The smell of freshly baked bread wafted through the house, the golden morning light streaming through the windows, painting the kitchen in warm hues. Armin came down, smiling, carrying the calm energy of his morning routine. But Aisha did not appear. Instead, I received a message on my phone. "I'm not coming today. Don't wait for me." I held the plate in my hands, staring at the empty chair where she should have been. My chest tightened. I could feel the walls closing in, the house shrinking around me, each corner echoing with the silence left by her absence. For a brief moment, I questioned myself. Had the laughter and love of our early days been real, or had it been a fragile illusion? Had I imagined the warmth we once shared? When Armin sat down beside me, concern evident on his face, I tried to hide my pain. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked gently. I shook my head, forcing a small smile. "Nothing, just a quiet morning." But inside, my heart was breaking. I realized, painfully, that I could no longer hold on to the family I had known. The daughter I had welcomed into my home, the person I had loved as my own, had turned away, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Over the following days, the emptiness became tangible. I moved through the house as if through a fog, noticing every empty corner, every quiet room, even small gestures, like leaving a cup of tea by her bedroom door, or tidying her side of the closet, went unnoticed. My heart ached with every passing day. The betrayal, settling deeper and deeper into my bones. I began to notice subtle signs that made the pain sharper. Aisha would sometimes leave notes for Arman, brief messages filled with plans or questions, but never a word for me. She avoided my gaze, her posture tense when I entered a room. The laughter that had once filled our home was replaced by quiet murmurs, doors closing softly, footsteps that passed by without pause. And yet, despite the pain, I tried to maintain calm. I reminded myself that anger would solve nothing. I tried to continue my routines, preparing meals, keeping the house orderly, tending to small chores, but every act felt tinged with sorrow. Even folding the laundry, once a mundane task, became a quiet meditation on absence and loss. I started keeping small journals, writing letters I would never send, recording the ache, the confusion, and the longing for a home that no longer existed as I had known it. I whispered to myself in the dark, trying to find understanding, trying to make sense of a betrayal that seemed both sudden and inevitable. In those quiet moments, I realized something essential. Some things cannot be fixed by love alone. Some relationships, no matter how nurtured, can drift apart, leaving a space that cannot be filled. And in that realization, there was both sorrow and clarity, a recognition that I could not control the choices of others, only the strengths with which I faced them. After that day, I decided I had to focus on myself. I couldn't change Aisha's feelings, and I couldn't force Arman to see the truth of what was happening. The home that had once been filled with laughter and warmth now felt heavy, quiet, almost unfamiliar. The first few weeks were the hardest. I spent hours in the kitchen, cooking meals for just myself. I chopped vegetables, stirred sauces, baked bread, and cleaned dishes that no one would taste but me. There was a strange comfort in the routine, in the rhythm of simple tasks that reminded me life went on, even when the people I loved had chosen a different path. I also walked through the garden every morning and evening, tending the flowers that had once been a shared joy with Aisha. The roses, with their gentle pink petals, reminded me of early days of happiness, of laughter that had once filled the air. I watered them carefully, pruning the leaves, speaking softly to the blooms as if sharing a quiet conversation. In those moments, the garden became my sanctuary, a place where the silence was not heavy but soothing. I wrote letters I never intended to send. I poured out my thoughts, my hurt, my love, my regrets, my fears. Some letters began with "I miss you," others with "I don't understand," and many simply with "Why." They captured the waves of emotions I could not speak aloud. Writing them helped me feel less alone, less overwhelmed. I would fold each paper carefully, stack them, and place them in a box on my shelf, a private repository of my feelings. It was during those quiet, solitary moments that I began to understand something important. Forgiveness was not for Aisha, it was for me. Holding on to anger, resentment, or hurt would only weigh me down, imprison me in the bitterness that had started to creep into every thought. I realized I had to release her from the control she had over my happiness. I had to choose peace, even if it meant stepping away from the person I had once loved as my own. I started small. Each morning, I made tea, sat by the window, and watched the sunlight spill across the room. I would breathe slowly, letting the warmth seep into me. I reminded myself of the love I had given, the kindness I had shared, and the small moments that no one could take away. Armand's first steps, birthdays celebrated together, quiet afternoons of shared laughter. I began to smile again, slowly, gently, almost as if my heart was learning to recognize happiness as something that could exist on its own, without depending on someone else's approval or presence. One afternoon, Armand came to me, his expression cautious. "Mom, I don't understand her sometimes," he said, sitting across from me at the small dining table. His voice was quiet, tinged with concern and confusion. I listened without judgment, nodding slowly. "I know," I replied softly. "Sometimes, people make choices we don't understand, but that doesn't change the love we feel, and it doesn't change who we are." It was a turning point for both of us. I realized that while I could not control her actions, I could choose how I reacted. I could choose patience.com and continued love for my son. I could remain steady, a safe presence in the home, even if another person chose to withdraw, and I could let go of the expectations that had caused so much pain. A few months later, Aisha returned briefly. She came into the living room quietly, her demeanor subdued, almost hesitant. Her eyes met mine for a moment, then looked away. She didn't speak much, and I felt no need to confront her. I simply prepared tea and offered it to her. She accepted it with a small nod, an almost imperceptible acknowledgement, and left again. There was no grand reconciliation, no dramatic apology, but that simple exchange felt significant. It reminded me that peace could exist even amid fractured relationships. It wasn't a perfect ending. I didn't have the happy resolution I had once imagined in my mind. There were no sweeping gestures, no heartfelt confessions, no easy restoration of the past, but I had something more important. I had my own peace. I had my strength. I had learned to hold love in my heart without expecting it to be returned in the way I had hoped. I began to focus on the relationships that remained steady: my friends, my family who had always stood by me, neighbors who checked in with a cup of tea or a gentle smile. I found comfort in small, ordinary moments: the hum of the morning kettle, the smell of fresh bread in the oven, the soft light streaming through the curtains at dawn. I learned that joy could be found in the quiet, in the ordinary, and that it was mine to keep, independent of anyone else's choices. I also learned the importance of boundaries. I could love without enabling harm. I could be present without being dismissed or controlled. Each day, I reminded myself that my worth was not defined by someone else's actions or decisions. I began to say no when I needed space, to step away from situations that threatened my calm, and to protect my heart from unnecessary pain. Slowly, my heart began to open again. I could smile at memories without being hurt. I could remember the early days with Armand and Aisha without longing or regret. I could enjoy tea on the balcony, tend to flowers in the garden, and watch the soft light of morning spill across familiar corners of my home. These small joys became anchors, steadying me against the tides of disappointment and loss. I also started to reconnect with myself in ways I had neglected. I read books I had once loved, spent quiet afternoons knitting, and listened to music that moved me. I discovered that solitude could be healing, that my own company could be comforting. The house, once heavy with tension, began to feel lighter, filled with a sense of quiet resilience. And in that reflective, quiet space, I realized a deeper truth. Betrayal does not have to destroy us. It can teach us resilience, patience, and the strength of quiet love. I understood that love is not always reciprocated in the way we wish, and that sometimes the most profound love is the one we nurture for ourselves. In time, I found a sense of freedom I hadn't expected. The weight of resentment lifted slowly, replaced by clarity and calm. I learned that I could hold someone in my heart without needing them to stay, that I could cherish moments without clinging to them, and that my own happiness was within my reach, no matter what others chose. Most importantly, I learned to be gentle with myself. I gave myself permission to grieve what I had lost, to feel the sadness, the confusion, and the quiet ache of betrayal. And once I allowed those feelings to exist, I found they no longer controlled me. They became a part of my story, yes, but not the definition of my life. In the months that followed, our home began to feel like my own again. I welcomed laughter from friends, the occasional visit from family, and the quiet moments of contentment that had always existed in the small corners of life. I was still a mother, still loved Armand deeply, but I had also learned to love myself. And in that love, I discovered a peace that was steady, unshakable, and entirely my own. Looking back now, I can see the full arc of that difficult chapter with a clarity that feels almost surreal. It began with shock, the kind of shock that makes your chest tighten and your thoughts stumble. It grew through tension and heartbreak, moments where I felt lost in my own home, surrounded by silence that once would have been filled with laughter. And finally, it settled into quiet understanding, a stillness that is neither bitter nor painful, but reflective, calm, and full of subtle lessons. I will never forget the day my daughter-in-law turned against me. That moment is etched in my memory, the soft words, the unexpected distance, the realization that someone I had loved as my own had chosen to step away. And yet, I will also never forget the years of warmth and love we once shared, the laughter over cups of tea in the kitchen, the quiet afternoons spent in the garden, the small gestures of care that had made me feel so cherished. Both memories exist side by side now, like two threads woven into the fabric of my life, one painful, one tender, and both inseparable from who I am. Life, I have learned, continues even when we feel it has paused. Relationships change. People make choices we cannot predict. Sometimes, even the people we love most may act in ways we do not understand, ways that hurt us deeply. And yet, life continues. The sun rises, the tea grows warm in our cups, the flowers bloom, the house, with its quiet corners and familiar sounds, carries on. The key, I have realized, is to hold on to what we can control, our own hearts, our own integrity, our own capacity for love. I learned to forgive silently, not because she deserved it, not because what had happened was okay, but because I needed it for my own peace of mind. Holding on to anger and hurt would have anchored me to a place of bitterness that could have clouded every day of my life. Forgiveness allowed me to breathe again. It freed me from carrying the weight of another's choices and gave me space to heal. I also learned to let go of control. I had spent months wondering if I could change her feelings, if I could make the past go back to how it was, if I could convince Armand to see the truth of what was happening. But life doesn't bend to our desires. People are free to make choices, sometimes painful ones, and the sooner we accept that, the sooner we can reclaim our own peace. Letting go doesn't mean we love less, it means we love more wisely, without losing ourselves. I found joy again, in the quiet, ordinary moments that make life beautiful. There is a magic in morning light spilling across the floor, in the gentle hum of the kettle on the stove, in the fragrance of freshly baked bread. I learned to notice the small things, a bird landing on the garden fence, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the soft comfort of a blanket on my lap. These moments became anchors, gentle reminders that life is still full of beauty, even amid heartbreak. Each morning, I pour my tea, watch the sun rise, and remind myself, I am enough, I am loved, I am resilient. And in those quiet mornings, I feel gratitude for what remains rather than sorrow for what has gone. While some chapters end unexpectedly, new ones are always waiting to be written, full of possibility, even if they are quieter than we once imagined. I have come to see that the most important relationships are the ones that nourish us, the people who stand by us when others withdraw, who share laughter and tears without judgment, who offer a hand when the heart feels heavy. These are the connections worth holding on to. I learned to cherish them, to invest my energy in kindness, patience, and care, without demanding that anyone else meet my expectations. Love, I realized, is not a possession. It is a gentle presence, a choice to act with warmth and compassion, even when it is not returned exactly as we hope. I've also discovered the quiet strength of patience. Healing does not happen all at once. Some days, I would still feel the ache, the pang of absence, the reminder of the home I had imagined that never fully existed, and that was okay. I allowed myself to feel, to grieve, to reflect. Gradually, the sharp edges of pain softened. The sadness became a gentle undercurrent rather than a storm that consumed me. And in that space, I could finally breathe, think clearly, and open my heart again. I came to understand that betrayal, while painful, does not have to destroy us. It can be a teacher, revealing resilience we did not know we possessed, patience we had yet to practice, and a capacity for quiet, unwavering love that does not demand recognition. I learned that it is possible to hold love in our hearts without clinging to the people who reject it. We can continue to love, but we can also protect ourselves, find balance, and maintain our dignity. Even in heartbreak, there is hope. Even in loss, there is the possibility of renewal. Life is not always fair, and people will sometimes make choices that hurt us. But within that reality, we can cultivate something enduring: self-respect, inner peace, and the gentle awareness that our hearts are stronger than we might believe. I carry these lessons with me now. When I walk through the garden, water the roses, fold the laundry, or simply sit in the quiet of the morning, I do so with a sense of calm. The past remains, yes, but it no longer controls me. I remember the love that once existed and honor it, without letting its absence overshadow the present. I honor my own journey, my own growth, and the quiet victories of resilience and hope. If there is one lesson I can share, it is this: love deeply, but do not cling to those who reject you. Cherish the relationships that nourish your heart. Forgive, not for others, but for yourself. Protect your peace, and remember that even in heartbreak there is strength, and even in loss, there is hope. That life is gentle, even when it hurts. It has a way of teaching us patience, of guiding us to find the light in small moments, of reminding us that we are capable of love even when it is not returned as we expect. And slowly, with quiet courage and persistent care for our own hearts, we learn to hold our hearts open again. We learn to smile at memories without pain. We learn to love ourselves as fiercely, as tenderly, and as fully as we once loved others. Looking back now, I see that chapter not as a story of loss, but as a story of growth. I see the pain, yes, but I also see the resilience, the small victories, and the quiet, enduring hope that continues to shape my days. And in that reflection, I am filled with gratitude for the love I have given, for the love I still carry within me, and for the life that continues, unfolding gently, one ordinary, beautiful moment at a time.